the statues with their blowguns and the monkey on this side and the whole thing together, it would have been too much information to digest at once in a ride. But if you orchestrate things and know what the hierarchy of importance is, it's going to communicate more clearly, and it's going to focus the gag, the storytelling, and give more punch to the emotional moment you're trying to communicate.
You're about to get a masterclass in attraction design. In this conversation, you're going to learn how Disney Imagineers use a trick to make a small ride seem larger than it actually is, how chainsaws were used to create Critter Country at Disneyland, how you need to be thinking if you're going to design a ride using a trackless ride system, how Imagineers use hierarchy to communicate a story in a short amount of time, how breaking expectations at the Tower of Terror made it one of the greatest attractions ever, how Disney builds anticipation in a ride the way filmmakers do. And if that's not enough, you're going to learn the meaning behind the phrase, when everything's important, nothing's important. Our guest today is Joe Lanzisero, former Senior Vice President of Disney Imagineering. He's an Imagineer who's worked on some amazing projects over a 40-year span. With WDI, he oversaw the concept design and execution of attraction development for an entire Disney theme park. Wait, did I say one? I meant 3. Oh, and the Disney Cruise Lines too. So Joe's an authority on the subject of attraction design, and he has the heart to share his knowledge with you. This is Controlled Chaos. We talk about how theme parks are created from first rendering to rope drop and beyond. We're different because our channel is made by people who actually make the magic. You're a brand new Imagineer. You just got your desk at 1401 Flower Street. And what is the first thing you do as an Imagineer, day one?
In those days, now remember, this was just the post rehiring after the big Epcot layoff. So I think when I got hired on by a guy by the name of Michael Morris, I was employee like 500 or 600. They had really gone down to a small team, and then they were starting to staff back up, because at that point, Michael Eisner and Frank Wells had come on, and they had announced the Disney decade, and it was crazy time. It was a fantastic time to make the transition over to Imagineering, because they were doing Disneyland Paris, they were doing they were doing the studio, they were doing Typhoon Lagoon. There was just so many projects going on. Splash Mountain, which we were just talking about. So I arrive over, I make the trek across the street from Feature Animation, which was also on Flower Street after they got kicked off the lot at Disney. Make the trek across the street, and there was this gentleman by the name of Gene Whiskerson, he was kind of the manager of facilities kind of thing. And I thought, well, I'm going to get an office now, and he basically walks me into the model shop, and there's 2 sawhorses with a piece of plywood on it. And he goes, okay, this is your spot, which happened to be right next to this crazy guy who had all these shrunken heads and idols and things next to me. It was Joe Rohde. And Joe was in the process of collecting the curios that would become the Adventurers Club. Which was wild, and then one of the old Imagineers, Jack Ferguson, was still there. He was right on the corner. Chris Runco and some special effects guys were in the other corner. And for me, the coolest thing was, this was the model shop where, as a kid, I watched Walt Disney walk around and talk to the model makers, when they were working on this 1964 World's Fair and the Pirates of the Caribbean. And it's like, I'm working here. This is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
So here I am looking at 2 sawhorses and a piece of plywood. I look over at Gene and I go, this is my office. He goes, yeah, everybody just kind of starts out here. I said, well, what about a chair and some lights? He goes, just walk the hallways, and whatever you can find, grab and bring it back and put it together. And then I befriended Joe Rohde. And then I don't know if you know who Nina Ray Vaughn is. She was a great illustrator, still is. And she was on the other side of me. And I found a lamp. I found a nice chair. Then in those days, because it was all analog art, WDI had an art shed where you would go and like a checkout window, and I made a shopping list. Okay, I want these markers and I want these Prismacolor pens, and you brought them to the window, and oh, it was like Christmas. You walk back to your desk with all the goodies. So that's what my 32-year-old self did that first day at Imagineering. And
That's
then what's
cool.
great, and like I said a moment ago, there was all these great projects going on, and they called me in, and I started work. I think the first thing I started working on was Typhoon Lagoon, doing yeah, because Tony Baxter was the one who brought me over from animation. A friend told me that, you know, they were hiring, and again, it's a long story about, what had gone on in animation that kind of motivated me to look off across the street and go, hey, it's going to be more fun over there, which boy did it turn out to be. And so yeah, so I came over with kind of reputation as the cartoon guy because I came from animation. And I always hate to make the comparisons with Mark Davis and some of the other animators turned, Imagineers, but I brought that kind of same lineage because I came from that same background of learning. And my stuff, even the stuff that I did in animation, always was kind of on the silly side. I guess I'm kind of a silly guy, and I like humor. I grew up reading Mad Magazine and watching Looney Tunes, so that had a pretty strong effect on the way I saw the world and what I wanted to do with my art. Um, they gave me the assignment to just come up with a bunch of gags for Typhoon Lagoon, that kind of peppered the whole site. And then after I did those, and Marty really liked them, and the rest of the people that were in charge at the time. So then I got more specific assignments, like I designed the kid area. They had it kind of roughly laid out, but they wanted something a little more fun, a little more whimsical. So again, I took that same approach using kind of like driftwood animals, as kind of the motif for in there. I think some of them are actually still there after all these years. But
I need to go back to Typhoon Lagoon. It's just
yeah.
down the street.
Oh,
So,
okay.
well, and this is actually a good segue into Mark Davis because he was kind of the Disney gag guy. Um, and I feel like, I mean, talk about your approach to a gag along the lines of a Mark Davis. Just, I feel like they move along the story, and I'm thinking about, and they don't have to be serious; they can be whimsical because at Pirates of the Caribbean, the mayor is being drowned in the well.
I know.
That's a gag. But
I mean,
there's also gags throughout Roger Rabbit's cartoons. They're everywhere. But
yeah.
so how do you approach that?
Again, I think it goes back to a couple things. Back to my animation training. You have to have an inherently kind of fun side or silly side to you because you got to look at the world in kind of a more funny way, I guess. But there are technical things, and I think the
Mm,
lessons from animation about communicating a idea quickly, and I think that was one of the hallmarks of Mark's work. Um, and one of the things I quickly realized, that was kind of a similarity between what I was doing in animation and what I had to do at Imagineering, was that communicating an idea quickly, with great focus. Uh, in animation, it's 24 frames a second. So you have to come up with a pose, that, whatever the storyboard said or what the director was telling you, okay, in this scene, the character is gonna slip on this banana and hit his head, but then he's gonna realize that something else happens, whatever. And so you have to find, okay, I got like 3 poses to communicate that idea. And if you look at Mark Davis's work, he just he was able to capture emotions, and I think more than gags, and they are gags, they're emotional moments. They're able
mm.
but he did emotional moments in a humorous way. And I went back to his training as well animation, that you had to be able to, get to the essence of what am I trying to say here? What is the core idea? And then make sure you strip away everything else. I remember there was a great layout artist by the name of Ken O'Connor. Ken O'Connor was a brilliant art director. He worked on many of the classic films, like in the 1950s, Peter Pan's, Cinderella, and he was one of our instructors at Cal Arts. And Ken O'Connor always talked about the billboard effect. And so, what is the billboard effect? He goes, well, imagine you're in a car and you're driving, 40, 50 miles an hour, and you've got to communicate an idea, that people are going to just glance up and get that idea that's on the billboard. And that was a great piece of learning, and especially when I then translated that to what happens in a ride. Because in a ride, you're moving through on some kind of conveyance. In some cases, you have more control over it. I think with an omnimover type vehicle or a free range vehicle. But regardless of the conveyance, you're still having to communicate an idea quickly. And I think it even has to be stronger in a ride than in a movie or animated film, where you're sitting, you have a captured audience, they're sitting in a chair and they're staring at the screen. Whereas on a ride vehicle, you may have a screaming kid next to you, or, your bag drops or something, there's distractions, So then your job is even more important in terms of making sure that idea is being communicated as strongly and as simply as you can. For me, the master class in that is and always will be, I think, Pirates of the Caribbean. I mean, the brilliance, and I think that was the brilliant teaming of Mark and Claude, with the way the sets were configured and the way the figures, first, again, the posing of the figures, which told emotional stories, and then how they were placed within the sets, with the way the ride moved through it and things kind of unfolded before you. Which gets me into, and this is a long answer, but I think it's important.
Yeah.
I want to show my T-shirt. And that was
Everything.
when everything's important, nothing is important. And that became kind of my mantra through my career. And that was about, making sure, I think a lot of designers fall in love with design and stuff. And your job is more about being an editor. Have the idea, you can have a bunch of stuff, but you got to make sure it's, first off, there's a hierarchy of importance. Asking yourself, and this is what I would ask my team, like when we were working on Roger Rabbit, Mystic Manor, whatever it was. And first, at the highest level, what were the important story points for the overall ride experience? And this went back to animation. I always did little teeny storyboards. I don't know if they're on my website or somewhere out there, but I did these little thumbnails. They were very scratchy for Roger Rabbit. In fact, I used those to sell the ride idea to Michael Eisner and Frank Wells at the time. And I always did those little scratchy storyboards, just kind of, okay, what is the big idea? And kept them as simple as possible. And that goes back to animation too. If you look at, especially the work of Bill Peet, fantastic storyboard artist. He went on to do children's books. If you're not familiar with Bill Peet, look him up.
Okay.
Brilliant visual communicator, because he knew how to just strip things down to the essence and get to the core of what he was trying to communicate. So so I always said, so then when it came time, map out the big idea. Then when it came time to actually work out the scene, I said, always make sure there's an A, B, and C. A is the main story point that you want to communicate. Okay. And I'm going to use something that everybody knows as an example, and that's you mentioned it earlier, the dunking of the mayor scene. Okay, so the most important thing there is the mayor being dunked. So when you turn the corner, the very first thing you see, the boat is looking straight at at the mayor. And you know, the next thing, of course, the guy who's dunking him, and then the third element is the next set of poor victims that are also going to get dunked. But it's so clear. There's a 1, 2, 3. You know, and I tried to do the same thing in any attraction I did, like in Mystic Manor. Um, there's the scene where you go into the tribal arts room, and there's these three statues with blowguns, and then there's the monkey that's gotten the darts have stunk him to the wall. But again, we wanted to, you know, okay, what's the first thing? It's about seeing the statues, the tribal art statues. Okay, that's the most important thing. Second, they have blowguns, so make sure then we add a sound effect. So okay, I understand. Then there's blowgun, and then we turn you. And third is the effect, get kind of a cause and effect. But if you would have just gone into that room and seen the statues with their blowguns and the monkey on this side and the whole thing together, it would have been too much information to digest at once in a ride. But if you orchestrate things and know what the hierarchy of importance is, it's going to communicate more clearly, and it's going to focus the gag, the storytelling, and give more punch to the emotional moment you're trying to communicate.
So there's a little bit of that dramatic reveal where you reveal the comedic element with Alvin, the monkey, after you see the drama. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and sometimes it worked the other way, where you would see him like in the conservatory scene where there's the giant Venus flytrap, and you see him immediately, you know, poking his finger at the flytrap, and that was also to point out that, you know, he was curious, and that one kind of was a single vignette that kind of told the whole story.
You mentioned something along this line of sort of creating drama and having a hierarchy. The idea of big room, small room, green room, red room when you're creating a dark ride. Talk about that.
Again, it's like, you know, in a film, you have 90 minutes to tell a story, you know. Um, the Disney films were great they're episodic, you know, and the story takes place in different places, um, and with different moods for each of the places. So when you translate that into a ride, and again, the original Imagineers were brilliant, especially the early dark rides. Peter Pan again is another masterclass in, what is it like? It's only like 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, if that.
But think about where you go, what you do. You start in the bedroom with the children. You meet Peter Pan. You're flying over London. Then you're flying over Neverland. But then you go deep down into Neverland where you get a closer view of the characters. And then you meet, you know, the main characters, Peter Pan and Captain Hook, and then the happy ending with the ship going off in the end. Um, and again, you know, big rooms, small rooms, medium-sized rooms, and the effect of that, of thinking about it in that way, going from large to small, warm to cool, is that it creates the sense that you've gone to more places. You know, if you're just in one big room, you know, with a bunch of stuff, you know, you could be in that room for 20 minutes and you will have less of an experience in terms of feeling like you've really seen a lot than if you break it down in a small room. That's what I thought.
Mm.
And one of the Imagineers who was brilliant at this was a gentleman by the name of Robert Coltrane. I don't know if you know Robert. He's one of those unsung heroes, I think, of Imagineering. I worked with him on Roger Rabbit ride. We worked together on Mystic Manor. Um, Robert came from TV and set design, and that's what I love. You know, Imagineering too. One of the things I loved about it, and I'm just going to take a quick little tangent here, um, was the diversity of thinking. The different, because you had people that came from theater, you had people that came from TV, you had people like me that came from, you know, animation. Um, you know, all just very interesting backgrounds, and they brought their thinking and their point of view, you know, what they had learned to the process, which made it richer. Animation, on the other hand, I always said it was kind of a ghetto of thought there. And that's not a bad thing, but everybody, because it's one process, even today, I mean, even though they use computers, it's still, storyboard, script, laying it all out, animating it, editing it, adding the sound, and it's done. With with the attractions, the Imagineering, at least my experience was no two projects were ever alike. Everything was different, and so that means you had to, and it took so many different hands. It was such a collaborative art. Not that animation isn't a collaborative art. It's very, very collaborative too, but it's more structured in the collaboration. And that's what I loved about Imagineering, at least when I was there. Every project had a different challenge to it and different teams, although there were team members that I like to work with, especially when you build a shorthand with them, like someone like Robert Coltrane or Kevin Rafferty. We did a lot of projects together. Those were kind of always my go-to guys, just in terms of even if they weren't on the project, I would go and I'd like have peer reviews with them just to get another point of view. But yeah, bringing in all those different points of views and different coming from different places, I think made the whole not only the process but then the end result richer and more diverse.
Talk about cue lines. I get a lot of questions, comments, and we actually do a lot on cues. Um, Theron Skis said that he considered a cue line scene zero. If it's not scene one, it's scene zero. How do you approach attraction design, including the cue as part of it?
I think I disagree with Theron, who I love. He's a great guy, and I love the work he's doing right now with his new book and his League of Extraordinary Storytellers, which he invited me to be one of. Um, but as I said a moment ago, I think every attraction is a little different on how you want to
Mm,
approach it. It gets back. Remember, I was talking a moment ago about that first rough storyboard script of the experience. Your job is to understand what the story is. And we can talk about story in a little while, because I believe there's two different approaches to how you use story in a theme park. Um, but understand what the story is, and then what you want to communicate, getting back to that hierarchy of communication. And for me, the communication, it starts the moment you walk up to the attraction. You know, when you walk up to the Haunted Mansion, it's this well, at least in California, this antebellum mansion, in New Orleans. Um, and even though it's not spooky, there's the graveyard. I mean, there's the hearse out in front. There's little cues of what's going to happen, and I actually like it that it kind of builds the experience. And every attraction is different in terms of, like, you walk up the Tower of Terror, it's this hotel and you're watching people dropping. So for me, the storytelling starts the moment you walk up to what the attraction is. And some of
hmm
them give you more story, some of them give you less story, but there is some first engagement with what the story is going to be about when you walk up to it. And then from there, I mean, I believe the queue line should immediately pick up on that. And in some ways, and queue lines are interesting because, I mean, it's a technical thing. You got to hold people. You got to prepare them for getting on the ride vehicle. You got to get them sorted. You got to get them on the ride vehicle. Getting back to what I was talking earlier about distractions, there's a lot of distractions. So storytelling wise, then come up with an environment, a place, that's big enough, and the story about that place is your number one in terms of the hierarchy. That's your number one thing. That then, if people lose some of the other little details, again, and probably queue lines are the most distracting, or has the most distractions rather, in terms of the flow of an attraction, because there are all those things I talked about. There's a ride vehicle in the distance coming in, a little kid just, spilled his Coke, or, whatever. So like in in Roger Rabbit, we took you through some of the back alleys of Toontown, started introducing some of the characters, and at least it starts setting up a mood and starting to tell you some of the story points. In Mystic, I mean, it was a very calculated storytelling experience because we didn't have a known IP. It was our job to introduce you to the characters, introduce you to the place, and introduce you, at least set up the big story idea. And we did that through props, through posters, and then through a short little pre-show presentation with Albert the Monkey. So long answer to your question, every queue is a little different, but there's always a certain degree of storytelling that's going to happen, whether it's just the place itself that's the story, that's telling the story, or all the cute little things that are going on. Now, I thought it was interesting there was a moment when they were trying to add interactive things to queue lines. And I know operations, they had a lot of issues with that because, you need to move people through it. Like
Right.
I think it was the Dwarf Mine Ride in Florida. They added some little hands-on.
Yeah, you can spin a I can't remember what it is. I have to look. I was
Mm,
just there. But you got to spin something and it projects onto the ceiling. And if you do it fast enough, it plays an animation. They do that in the Pinocchio ride too. Or
yeah,
is it no Peter Pan.
yeah.
They've got you go into the Wendy and John's nursery and
Uh,
Tinkerbell is flitting across the screen and
oh yeah.
all sorts of interactive things are happening. But yeah, it slows up the line.
Yeah.
So
So, like I mentioned already, there's that fine line you're walking, the function of the space is to move people, from the front door to the ride vehicle and prepare them for the loading experience. So, that's the primary design purpose of it. On the functional level, then on the storytelling level, it's to start to set up. And again, it's how much story do you want to give away, and how much is it just setting up a mood too? Haunted Mansion, wow, brilliant. You walk into that tiny little, when you walk through the first door, you're in that little tiny room, then the door opens to the elevator. Then you're in this crazy stretching elevator, that has a touch of humor to it, but it's also a little, I remember as a kid when I went in it for the first time, I was like, what's going on here?
how am I going to get out of here?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
yeah. There's no doors and no windows. It's like, oh yeah.
Yeah. I was 4 or 5 when I first went on that at Disneyland, and I thought I was really stuck. I thought I was
Yeah.
in trouble.
Yeah. So so it's as much, it's setting up story points, it's setting up a sense of mood, it's setting up anticipation, and all those you kind of gotta balance how much of those you want to, infuse into that part of the experience.
Yeah. So how do you treat that now that you've got this line skipping thing where half the people are going in the standby line and then half are bypassing?
I,
What's
I
your
was
thought?
never I was never a big advocate. There's so much now that takes, and I don't want to sound like the bitter old guy. Oh, why are they doing that now? But there was a sense of equality in the original park. Walt, his whole thing was, to create an entertainment for everyone.
Everyone.
Yeah, and now it feels like there's this, there's almost like there's the elite, the people who can afford to, do the fast pass and all these other things. And part of me just feels like, create one experience that everybody has to go through. And even if you have to wait, I mean, that's what I love about the Japanese parks, that it's a different culture, and it's a culture that is a waiting culture. I was just in Japan week before last, and I went to Osaka for the World Expo, and it was probably one of the busiest days there. I mean, there were 20-minute lines for the restrooms. It was crazy. But culturally, the Japanese will just wait, and they're happy to wait, and until they get to, the front of the line, whatever. I think we've kind of created this culture in the US parks of, okay, I got, and it's also a value proposition too. You're spending a lot of money to go in the parks, and some people are saying,
Sure.
I want to get on, at least 8 attractions today if I spent this much money. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. And I understand the challenges and the current dynamics of the parks, but on the most fundamental level, I kind of wish, everybody got the same experience, because it would be like a movie, some people coming in like in the third act of a movie, because they bought the short ticket, it's just, I don't know, just,
Right.
what I'm saying? It, it's a single experience that you're trying to communicate, that, like I said, starts when you walk up to the front of the attraction, and then continues until you walk out the back door or through the gift shop. And everybody should
Yeah.
have the same experience when they're doing that.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame that notion of everyone is a VIP at Disneyland has sort of gone out. And Joe Sixpack, who works his life to get
Hmm.
his family to Disney, doesn't get a chance to go on as many rides as, rich guy from wherever who
Right.
comes in. And not to make it class warfare, but the point is that those guys have to pay a whole lot more for what used to be the experience for everyone as well.
Everyone.
So there's
Yeah.
kind of yeah.
Yeah.
So well, we'll see what.
Yeah. Who knows where it's all going to fall out?
Right. All right. So I have to ask you this question also. Did are you responsible for? And I was just looking on your website. There was a in Frontierland at Disney World at Magic Kingdom. There was Brer Fox and Brer Bear, and they're kind of going like this, looking out. There's this like, a sculpture. Is that your design?
That was my design that I did for Tokyo. No, 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 no. Actually, I did it for California first.
And then they
Interesting.
brought it.
And then interesting story. We were, when Tony Baxter was working on Splash Mountain for Disneyland, they wanted to change Bear Country to Critter Country. And yeah, and that was one of the first things, early things I did at Imagineering. Tony was one of those people that really was a big supporter of me. I got to say,
Mm,
like I said a moment ago, the people that saw more of me than I saw myself, and Tony was one of them. And in fact, he was my into Imagineering. But we can get in that story in a second. Answer your
sure.
question about Brer Bear and Brer Rabbit. So Tony asked me just to come up with some fun little vignettes and things to turn Bear Country into Critter Country. And then, so I came up with this idea, this motif of all the hand carved stuff, because that felt like it worked in that, kind of handmade world. And it was I think it was one of the project managers that was working on Splash Mountain, had a house up in Big Bear, California here, which is kind of the mountainous area. There's Lake Arrowhead, and it's just, a lot of people who live in LA have second homes up there because, it's close by, but it feels like you're out in the mountains. And he saw this guy, this chainsaw artist who was making these bears, and he brought back pictures of them. And so originally we were gonna have one of the sculptors in the WDI or WED at the time model shop, sculpt these bears. And we said, well, why don't we let this guy do them? Because then they'll look really authentic. So long story short,
Oh,
we get in contact with this guy and I do my drawings. And because I came from animation, I knew how to do turnarounds, because in animation you have to draw a character 360 degrees all the way around. So I did all there was one of my favorites, and it was there for a little while, and then they took it away because it wasn't politically correct. It was a cigar store Indian bear.
oh,
It actually lasted in Tokyo for quite a while. Anyway, so I did a whole series of all the little bears. The one bear that was pointing, holding the bear band sign, pointing to the bear band. And then when Tony saw them all, he goes, we really need one for in front of the queue for the for Splash Mountain with the Brer Rabbit character.
yeah.
And I did that. And then I think they took molds off of those, the ones that we made at Disneyland. They took molds off of them and then they recreated them in fiberglass for Walt Disney World and for Tokyo.
That's cool. I saw that today because I was just perusing through preparing, and I have a sketch. I don't know if the virtual background will show it. Yeah. So this is like a 1998 sketch. I was just sketching in Frontierland, and there's your design
Oh,
right
that's
there.
great.
So
Man,
yeah,
I'm really honored.
yeah.
That's
So
cool, man.
I would just hang out and draw, and
That's great.
there's Brer Bear and Brer Fox, and I thought, oh, there
That's
you
so
go.
cool. That's
Yeah.
very, very
So,
cool.
well, let's talk about foreign cultures because you brought up Japan, and this is one of the questions I had on my mind, and that's that Asian cultures are stereotypically, and you can tell me if this is wrong, but that they're risk averse. And so, especially, for example, Mystic Manor
Mhm.
had no IP. Was it a hard sell to get them to buy into this idea that they weren't getting an IP with this attraction? So how do you take a risk averse culture and get them to push a boundary without crossing a cultural boundary and doing something that they're just not comfortable with as a culture?
Very good question, Nate. It's interesting because I had two Asian experiences. I had the Japanese experience in Tokyo at Tokyo Disney Resort. And then I had the Hong Kong experience in Hong Kong, which it's not really China because post Disney, I did a lot of work in China. So I had that contrast, really understanding, that Hong Kong is kind of its own things, but it's still Chinese and it's still, there's still cultural things that you have to consider there. Um, so your risk adverse question. Oh, well, first I want to talk about Japan and then I'll talk about Hong Kong. In
Yeah.
Japan, um, OLC, they were risk adverse. Um, and I think it's part of their culture. Japan is, if you look at, they're not a country of innovation, but they're innovators in that I'm going to use the small car as an example. They didn't create cars, but they took the small car and they evolved it into, what small cars are all about. There's this wonderful book by, I think his name is Kenji Enjo. I'm not 100% sure, but it's called The Aesthetics of the Bento Box. And it's about Japanese design and how the bento box is the model for why they're able to innovate because within this little the box is established. It's analogous, to work. Do you work inside the box or outside the box? And to them, the box is an opportunity. It has seasonal overlays. If it's the fall, there's certain, we're going to put pumpkin, whatever. But the box, they don't look at as a limiting thing. It's like, what can I do inside this box? So there was this way of thinking about design in a more, I'm going to look at what's out there, and then put it in this box and make something special and different and better than what's already there. Um,
Mm.
so OLC kind of took that attitude towards what they
And
were.
by the way, that's Oriental Land Company for those who don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're the folks who manage what 51% of Disney Tokyo Disneyland.
Yeah. No, actually, they own the whole thing.
Oh, they do. Oh, okay.
Tokyo Disneyland is the only park that's not owned by the Walt Disney Company.
Okay, interesting. All right.
Tokyo Disney Resort is wholly owned by the Oriental Land Company on a licensing agreement. Crazy as it sounds, same
Mm,
like a toy company that wants to license Mickey Mouse, and pays a licensing fee. It's way more complicated than that, but that was the deal that was struck at the time, and turned out to be very, very lucrative for Disney, and in some ways a good deal because they just provide operational oversight and then are in control of all the design, and they don't have to deal with any of the other headaches of running a theme park. They just get
mm.
this nice big royalty check every year. Um, anyway, getting back to the cultural considerations there and the risk adverse thing. Um, so OLC, they followed that pattern in Japanese. They wanted to see, okay, they're building Splash Mountain in California. We're going to go and we're going to ride Splash Mountain. And okay, this is going to be right, but we have to make some cultural changes. I was in charge of the design for the Splash Mountain in Tokyo. And there were two big cultural changes that at the time were paramount in their minds. One was you can't get people wet because
Mm,
beyond Tokyo Disneyland, when you went there, a lot of the women and a lot of the men were wearing very expensive kimonos and happy coats. It's now very, very Western there, but at the time, it was still very Japanese in that regard. And these were expensive pieces of clothing, and they didn't want to get them wet. So I remember, crazy as it sounds, we built an entire mock-up of Drop 5 to engineer out the splash in Splash Mountain in Japan. So that was one cultural consideration. The second was the Japanese are very modest people, and the inline seating that they had in Anaheim was not going to fly. So we had to do side by side seating, and that in turn, made the trough wider. And I mean, there were a lot of design kind of ripples from that went through the attraction. So OLC were always great about looking at, what was done in the other parks and then wanting to do the absolute best version of that in their parks. And I still believe, some of the best versions of any of the other any of the big attractions in any of the parks, you're going to find in Tokyo, and they're going to be impeccably maintained, because they are, again, because they're their own company, and it's just part of Japanese culture, to keep things pristine and clean and working and perfect. Sometimes I get a little sad looking at, some of my creations in other parks, but I know that creation over in Tokyo looks like it did on opening day.
it's perfect. As an aside, you should go watch. There's a video on the Toyota company. Do you know anything about Toyota? We don't have
I,
to
I
cut.
I know a lot about Toyota because I'm a big fan of what they're doing right now. They're building a city called Woven, which,
Really.
yeah, it's amazing. You need to look it up, and people are watching. Look up Woven City, Japan, and the
Okay.
Toyota, because they're such an innovative company. And Woven is because they started as a weaving company.
Mm,
But Mr. Toyota, at least the current, generation of Toyota people, he is creating this. And you know what it is? It really harkens back to Walt's concept for Epcot. It's a truly integrated small city, which takes transportation, is of course because they're Toyota, but that's kind of the key idea, and how you have commerce and transportation, but with the focus on the human experience, that everything
mm,
is about how people interact in this space, and how, where the cars are, where the bicycles are, where commerce vehicles are, where rapid transit goes, how living spaces juxtapose and work with natural spaces. It's amazing. Check it out. Woven,
interesting.
yeah. But
Yeah. And
what were you going to say about
oh well,
Toyota?
watching this video, I'll post the link to Woven City, but then also it was just interesting that when Toyota, there was a documentary, their approach to things is they will make sure that whatever part it is exactly perfect. They will hand make this part so that it works, and it'll take 6 years to develop this part. And once they have that part, they know it works perfectly and they'll keep it for 20 years. But they won't put it out there until it's absolutely perfect. So when they get a design pushed through, it works exactly as intended with very little problems at all. And I just thought it was just this great. We're going to make this. There's a German word, I think it's Pucke. It's just like the absolute perfect design for what it needs to be. So I love the way that Toyota approaches things versus sort of that American approach where it's like we're going to put it out there and fix it later, that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, and that goes back to, that's a cultural thing that I learned. Japan was an island nation for so many years without any, outside influences. So they went inward with everything. They go
Mm,
deep into things, and like the tea ceremony is a good example of that. Where every move and everything is the gestures, everything is calculated. Ikebana, the beautiful, arranging of flowers, everything. They just, even to today, there's a there's a phrase, I think they're called, oh God, I don't want to mispronounce it, but they're geek. The Japanese, like if you're into model trains, you are into model trains. I mean, that is your whole life. And they have these incredible train stores there. Or if you're into manga, you are like, it all. So it's a cultural thing that maybe from the outside people would say, oh, it's obsessive, there's unhealthy things about it. And like everything in life, you got to look at things and look at the good side of them and the bad side. For me, the good side of that is that there's a quality, like you just said, that little part that they just made. Somebody spent years of their life, every day going deep into that to make this thing that was perfect.
All right, well, let's get back to some of this other stuff. So,
Okay.
Mystic Manor was a trackless ride system, and so was Pooh's Honey Hunt. Talk about the advance, and this is kind of a new technology, I think,
Yeah.
Ratatouille as well. Talk about, and the reason I'm asking this because we have a lot of students saying trackless ride system, trackless, and it sort of solves a lot of problems because you can load everyone at once, then you can just send them
Mhm.
to wherever you want. It eliminates needing to solve design problems because you can just say, oh, we're just going to put this one here and this one there. Talk about the advantages and disadvantages of trackless in your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I think you have to work even harder and be more, again, focused and understand, where people are going to be and how they're going to be moving around, um, in terms of how you stage things and the timing on things. Um, and let me just say this, I think every ride and every ride experience, is a little different, and that's what makes it wonderful. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to a park that was all trackless ride vehicles, and you wouldn't want to go to a park that was all boat flume rides, and I think that's what makes the theme park experience,
Mm.
Disney and Universal are the best at it, of creating unique conveyances through the experience. Some of the conveyances, I think, work better in terms of how they marry the movement through the experience with the storytelling. Um, while others, maybe it's becomes a distraction, and I could talk about that for a long time. So just taking the trackless vehicle on its own terms, um, I think it's good for certain kinds of rides. I mean, you can't be too aggressive with them. So if you want to create any kind of a heightened moment, and I learned this when we were doing, well, both in Pooh's Honey Hunt, which I came onto that late. I did some work at the beginning, and then I kind of finished it up at the end. So I can't take credit for a lot of the really brilliant, great choices that were made there, like the bouncing Tigger room, where you walk in and they actually have the whole floor bouncing. Um, but again, you have to think about how because the vehicles are big and they're lumbering, how am I going to create moments with those that have different emotional impact? I have not ridden it, but I've watched the video of the Beauty and the Beast ride, and that looks really good in terms of, trying to create. And that was Robert Coltrane, who I mentioned earlier, too. And he really understands that big, small, fast, slow, and how to create experiences, that have a lot of variety and a lot of emotional impact. Um, so with the trackless vehicle, I think you have to, think about how am I going to get those emotional changes, because the ride vehicle itself, it can speed up, it can turn, but it's not really like, a pirate boat going down a flume, which really gets the adrenaline out. An omni mover that can turn in a moment and something startles you. So it's just, you have to think about, again, getting back to the storytelling and the hierarchy of importance. What do I want to tell in this room, and how am I going to communicate getting some kind of impact? In Mystic, I think the most powerful scene is the scene where the power from the music box starts to tear the house apart, and the monkey has to grab the box. And I mean, those ride vehicles they're not moving very fast in that room, but then we heighten the effect by adding, video that made it feel like the whole room was spinning. We added fans into the room, the sound effects, it's all that layering of things that you do to
Mm.
heighten the dramatic impact of what you're trying to tell. So, um, yes, there are pros and cons with the trackless vehicle. The con is that you can't move them too fast. The pro is that you have more control over where you're going to put people and how it interacts and juxtaposes not only with the other vehicles, but then with the show sets that you create.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, Roger Rabbit, you married teacups with a dark ride. Where did that come from? That was really cool. And by the way, I was working at Jungle Cruise back then,
Oh,
and we got to go over to ride Roger Rabbit before anyone else got to see it. And it was just a cool. And I remember seeing I was this 22-year-old kid in my Jungle Cruise costume, and I was the coolest kid in the world. And I,
fun.
and I saw this guy in this ridiculous outfit, which was the Benny the Cab outfit from Toontown, and I thought, I'm so glad I'm not wearing that. It looks ridiculous. But what was interesting was that when you get into that space, it's perfect. It just fits, it flows, it works. It's wonderful. Anyway, that's my aside. But so talk about the development of the ride system for Roger Rabbit. I know you get this question a lot, but I just think it's
Yeah.
cool.
One of the great things about Imagineering, and I said this earlier in this talk about the diversity of thought and the people when you get them together. We were Roger Rabbit team. We were kind of the B team because the A team was all off doing Disneyland Paris. We benefited from that because we developed the whole thing, built the whole model, started production, and then Disneyland Paris was winding down. So we got all these great people that just had finished making the most beautiful park in the world to come then and help us actually construct Toontown. So amazing, amazing hands were all over that project, and I was so fortunate, to benefit from that. But getting back to Roger Rabbit and the ride system, so I think Disneyland had how many dark rides at the time? One, two, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 dark rides. And the question was, do we need another dark ride? So
Mm.
I'm sorry, and getting back to what I was saying about where the idea came from. I love that you would go into brainstorms or just a casual meeting and the ideas would start flying and then a brilliant idea came up and you would walk out of the room at the end and it was really hard to say who was the author of that idea because it was this building of ideas. Okay, we need to have we're trying to do a different kind of dark ride. Okay, what's going to make it different? And then we start riffing on that, and then all of a sudden, say, well, what if the we did something with it? It might have been our kind of scoutmaster, and I say that, or father figure on that project was a gentleman by the name of Dave Burkhart, and Dave actually came from Disneyland and had a lot of background. Actually, he worked on the original Magic Kingdom. I think he worked on the with Tony on the submarine rides there, installing it. But Dave was great. He was at least, I know he was 10 years older than me at the time and much older than some of the other people. So he brought a lot of experience and operational background, and he was the one. I don't know if he came up with the idea, but he was the one who um, we knew we had to test out the idea, what it would mean if we gave up control of the ride vehicle to a point and allowed people to spin it. Because we thought, oh, that would be really fun. And it fit the temperament of what we were trying to do. Roger Rabbit is, definitely in the lineage of those Warner Brothers Looney Tune cartoons that I love that are just absolutely crazy and manic. And we all loved Mr. Toad's Wild Ride and how crazy and manic that was. And that was the energy, that was the gestalt that we were going for in that ride. So the spinning thing seemed like a great idea. So Dave arranged, because he knew all the operators at Disneyland, he arranged, and I've told the story a bunch of times because it was so much fun. He arranged to have a teacup put on the chassis of the Pinocchio ride vehicle so that we could see. We were testing out a number of things. First, just the technical aspects. Could, the bogie with a dynamic, spinning thing on it not tip over, whatever. And fortunately, and it didn't take much engineering to make that work, and it worked great. But the second thing was, what did that do to the experience where now guests could look anywhere? And I remember there was this moment where we were going through Pinocchio, and we must have did it 10 times that night, and we were all having so much fun. It was great. But where I spun the vehicle, and it was right at that moment where Monstro comes up, and it was like the timing was perfect. But at that moment of Monstro coming up is such a big moment. So immediately I thought, you know what, for this to work, our storytelling is going to have to be really broad strokes. We're going to have at least one big thing in every room. So even if you're spinning, at some point you're going to see that big thing. So if you go through Roger Rabbit, you'll notice that there's one big thing in every room. And that big thing was always at least tied back to whatever the story point was that we were trying to get across in that particular scene. Because our thought was, you're spinning, the overall environment would tell the story, like getting back to that hierarchy, number one. And then whatever that one visual thing was that supported that story would be number two. And if you could get those two things, and then all the other pieces, would fall in. And one of the things I always loved about Disney attractions, and I remember as a kid, the Haunted Mansion, first time I went on it, and actually it was 69. So how I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and I didn't even know it was open. The day we went to Disneyland, we were taking my grandmother to Disneyland. And it was just my dad and myself and my grandmother, and my dad, and I said, look, that it's open, and was in preview. It was in soft opening. It hadn't, and I went on it, and I came out, and it was like, oh my gosh, I have to go on that like 20 more times, especially that moment when you go down, backwards down into the graveyard. And I remember turning that corner, and just like, there's all these figures and ghosts and singing. It's like, oh my gosh, and for me, that was, and same with Pirates, or Small World, the classic Disney attractions was like, you always gave them more than they could digest in the first time through. And that's, and Roger Rabbit was my first ride that I got to do. And so I said, I want that same feeling, when you get off Roger Rabbit, you want to go back on it again immediately, because there's other things there you knew that you didn't get to see. And I want to go back and see them again.
Yeah, that's great. And getting back to Haunted Mansion, I just love the fact that, that graveyard scene is kind of the climax because you don't see a ghost outside at all. You go
Right.
in the foyer, nothing. You go in the stretch room and there's always My Way and he's
Yeah.
hanging up above there. But it takes you until the ballroom scene to really see anything, right?
Yeah.
Um, and then finally, it's like the big reveal when you're in the graveyard. So there's kind of that anticipation where it's this gradual ramp up, and I think that's part of the reason it works.
It's absolutely the reason why it works. And again, those guys were filmmakers, and they understood that you got to, build an experience. Imagine if you saw all those ghosts in the first scene, where do you go from there, right?
Right.
And even holding back, it's that, less is more. When everything's important, nothing's important, knowing, that you've got to, kind of spoon feed people bits of information with a bigger understanding of how, the emotional impact it's going to have on them. And when you get to a certain point, that you're going to pull out all the stops, the room blowing up in Mystic Manor, or, there's many other examples too, not just from my attractions, but, getting them to that big wow moment, the big
Yeah.
in Tower of Terror. I mean, just understanding how to build the experience.
Yeah, at Magic Kingdom in Florida, that's perfect because you think you're going to drop, but you don't. You go out into the room and then you're in the Twilight Zone for a
Oh,
while. You see
yeah.
the E equals MC squared and talk
Nate,
about building drama.
yeah, and that's one of my favorite moments in Disney, right? Because it completely it breaks you're in an elevator. Elevators do one thing, they go up and they go down, and then all of a sudden you're in this elevator that's moving down a hallway. I mean, I thought that was brilliant. And I was always so disappointed that we couldn't use that in Tokyo. I remember when when getting back to this whole risk adverse thing. By the way, we never finished talking about risk adverse and Hong
Let's
Kong.
let's come back to that. Yeah.
We'll get back to that. But I remember pushing so hard. I said, let's do the Walt Disney World version. But unfortunately, that was during, and I can just be candid, that was during the Paul Pressler years.
Mm,
Or- and Paul Pressler basically told OLC, well, we just re-engineered it for California, and you're going to use that version, you know? And
that's a
again,
shame.
yeah, it's a total shame because that moment is like, I think one of the greatest moments in theme park, any theme park, just because of the surprise. And that, like I said, you usually go up and down, and this one you're going to go down the hall. That was great. Um,
But yeah, so let's go back to the risk averse thing with, and I'm sure, obviously Japan and China and Hong Kong, they're different cultures, so they have nuance
yeah,
there. But so talk about that. How do you get them to do something new without crossing that cultural line? And I'll give you an
yeah,
example. I was working on a ride years ago, and it was going to be a mummy attraction right when Mummy was coming out, and then we realized that the Japanese would not stand for that. They don't want to talk about death at
yeah,
all,
yeah.
and that wouldn't have worked. No one would have gone on it. So how do you know without?
Well, for okay, so that's the perfect segue into Hong Kong expansion, and we're given this assignment, to enlarge the park by 25%. It was the smallest Disney park ever built. There weren't enough things to do. Um, we had a limited budget. We had the same budget. We were building our expansion at Hong Kong at the same time they were building Cars Land at Disneyland, and we had the same budget as Cars Land. Cars Land delivered a single land, spectacular single land, fantastic, very innovative ride, but it was basically, three rides, two restaurants and some gift shops. Where we did three lands with we had three rides in Toy Story Land, Mystic, Grizzly, so five rides. All the area development that went with it, and we did a lot of new things. But with the Grizzly ride, we had the coaster there was kind of innovative in some of the things we were doing with it. But I have to answer the question about risk averse. It was a different challenge criteria that we were working against. Again, understanding the culture there. We actually had a professor from Asian studies at UCLA come and was part of our team because we knew, first off, the Chinese government, the government of Hong Kong, they were the major shareholder of the park. It was a 51-49 split. The government had that thin margin of, just a little more holding, so they had the final word on a lot of things. Not that they didn't listen to us or they were dictatorial, but they certainly had a strong voice in what we were trying to do. And they knew they needed things that were different. They wanted to be something first in the region because there was Tokyo Disneyland. They had their ear to the wall and they knew Shanghai was coming, so they wanted things that were going to be unique. So I have to tip of the hat to the government people at the time. They said we want three unique lands because this is what's going to drive people there. And they were not concerned with IP at all. And um, what we originally developed were three unique lands. It was Mystic Point, uh, big, Grizzly Gulch, and the third one was it was based on an Arctic outpost, and it was going to be we're going to have real snow, and it was like this art these researchers up in the Arctic. Um, Unfortunately, at the time, the kind of sister park or the rival park in Hong Kong was this park called Ocean Park, which is kind of like the local park in Hong Kong. It had been there for a long time. And there was like a lot of emotional attachment by the locals there. And the government, and by the way, the government had the same holdings in that park as they had in the Disney.
Mm,
And they were at the same time doing expansion while we were doing expansion. And one of their expansions was an Arctic land, very, 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 very different from what we were doing. But for whatever reason, they were concerned that, people would think either we were copying them or they were copying us. So at the 11th hour, I mean, we had built the model, we had started drawings on this Arctic outpost. And that's why we had to scramble. And we ended up doing Toy Story Land because they had just opened it in Paris. The rides could be quickly manufactured because the rides, they had all the molds for them and all the engineering was done. So, and in the end, when I think about it, I think it was the right choice because the three lands really complement each other really well, in terms of, we were talking earlier about big, little, small, just, you have a jungly mystic place and then you go to an old west deserty kind of, mountainy thing. And then you go into the bright cartoon land. So the three had very different flavors. And like the dark ride, then you felt like you were getting more and you were going through more places because
mm.
each one was so different from the other.
Let's talk about your books. Um,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I think we should talk about that because you're a very interesting person. And I just happen to have a 5-year-old and we're learning how to read. So talk about Lemonade, the Yellow
Okay.
Bear.
Did you have a copy?
I don't, but I ordered it.
Lemonade is my second children's book.
Oh,
The
okay.
first one was The Cat's Baton Is Gone that I wrote with Scott Hennessy, who was a great writer and really an interesting artist, very, very funny guy. And he and I did a lot of work on Tokyo projects together. In fact, we teamed up and I'm going to say it, we created the Duffy the Bear phenomenon because we knew we were looking for some kind of signature character at Tokyo Disney Sea. And Disney merchandising had introduced, um, it was just called the Disney Bear at the time. And we thought, oh, he's really cute. He's got the face that looks like Mickey, but it'd be better if we could create a backstory around him that would connect him to Tokyo Disney Sea. So Scott and I came up with the idea that, that Minnie created him for Mickey, put him in because Mickey at Tokyo Disney Sea, there's boats and Mickey goes out to sea and then comes back. And while he's away, he wanted a memento to remind him of Minnie. So it's a very sentimental, cute story. And we created a storybook and I did all the little rough sketches and had this wonderful artist by the name of Julie Svensson do the illustrations. And we presented that book to the head of OLC, Kagami-san, and said, there's this great little toy, but we think if you give him this new name and, connect him to these stories that he'll be very popular with the Japanese guests. Boy, were we right. because it turned into a juggernaut now, especially in Asia. So Scott and I did this book. Cat's Baton Is Gone. It's still available on Amazon. But then fast forward, I become a grandfather. I have two grandkids. I'm living in this world where I feel like it's swirling with, AI and computers and social media and all the stuff that are distractions from the simple wonders of the world. And every time I was with my grandkids, it was like, oh, they would play with a little stick, in front of the house, or my granddaughter sitting there and, we're in the park up the street and there's a dandelion and she picks the dandelion and there's this magic that's happening with her and the world, on the simplest level. And just thinking about how, kids are in tune with the magic of the world. And so I wanted to create this book for them, that just celebrated two things. One, the innocence and joy of being a child and letting your imagination kind of rule, and about being yourself. He's a little yellow bear who loves being yellow, and loves all things yellow. And there's no kind of beginning, middle, and end to it. I just set up the premise that he's just a little yellow bear that loves everything yellow, and then just riffed on that and had fun with all the things that he plays with, that he sees, that he discovers, and it's the joy of him being yellow and relating to all the yellow things that he finds. And yellow is such a happy color. So and and I did the entire book with one Japanese brush pen, and 5 Prismacolor pencils, because I wanted it to be kind of anti-AI, anti-computer, just a throwback to, again, me sitting there with my grandkids at the table with the crayons and just drawing on the table. One of my the artists that worked on Roger Rabbit with me, fantastic artist, art director, his name is Marcello Vignali. He was at Imagineering for a while, then went on to be an art director on animated films and live films too. He just did the Gabby's Dollhouse film. He was a production designer on that, and he's always been a great. He's a one of those deep thinker guys. And when I was working on Lemonade, I came to this moment where I was trying to decide, was I going to handwrite all the writing, or was I going to choose a font and have it printed? And I asked Marcel, and he said, Joe, he goes, oh, and the other thing was whether I was going to scan everything and kind of clean it up a little bit. And he said, Joe, these days, he goes, remember when we were kids, we would look at a coloring book, or we would look at a cartoon, and you knew it was hand drawn, and you weren't afraid of it. You would say, oh, I could do that.
Mm,
Now, when you look at a CG or an AI produced piece of art, it's like,
it's perfect.
it's perfect. And and you know what? The world isn't perfect. And so Marcelo, thank you, Marcelo, said, leave this is your hand. And it's, a little kid will look at this and go, oh, okay. I mean, I purposely didn't color inside the lines, because he said, a little kid will look at this and go, oh, I can do that, and feel, and almost empowering them in a way too, that, oh, I can do that too. So that was another kind of motivator for, or the reason why it looks the way it looks.
Yeah, I love that. It just reminds me of how Walt Disney would stoop down to get the child's view of Disneyland. This is legend, of course.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing with the markers, just trying to take their perspective on coloring.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's really great. And then you had another book coming out? Is that
Yeah. In
talk
fact,
about that?
yeah. Right about the time I left Disney, I got involved with this group in Austria called the World Usability Congress. And I talk, if you get the book, the story is there about how I got involved with them. The head of the Congress is a gentleman named Hannes Robier, and he is my co-author on the book. And he invited me to Austria to be the keynote speaker at this UX conference. And again, long story short, I said, thank you very much for the invitation. I go, but what's UX? And I get, it's this whole practice out there about, creating user experiences. And he explained to me that, Joe, this is what you've been doing your entire career at Disney. You've been creating user experiences. He goes, and your user experiences are so human centric and connect people in a deeper emotional way to the experience. And in his Congress and in his practice, it's human-centered design, but it's all kinds of design. We have people from computing industries, from the medical industry, automotive industries. It's anything, where people are having some kind of experience with something, and how you design that experience to be more in tune with the human person that's doing that experience. Uh,
Mm,
so I've now been a part of the Congress since It's coming up on 9 years. Next year will be 10 years. So in fact, I leave on Sunday to fly to Austria. And so Hannes and I have long been talking about doing the thing in any experience is, what creates a transformative experience? What's that moment that elevates any experience that really connects? And that's what he likes what I've done, because he says, the Disney parks are so great at doing that. And it's not a book about theme park design, although I use theme park design in some of my case studies. But we also had, it was a really fun process. We have Hannes and I were the primary authors, but then we had 5 other contributors. This one guy, Bruce Horn, who was one of the key designers at Apple, the great picture of him with Steve Jobs and Wozniak back when they were in the garage. And Bruce, he came up with the desktop folder idea and developed
Oh,
that
interesting.
part of the original. So he was like part of that whole thing. So he's doing some case studies for us. We have this woman from Philips Electronics who does, she's the head of their innovation, and they're doing all this incredible work using creating body doubles so that a doctor can actually construct somebody and do a surgery on them before they're actually put into surgery. And then what kind of, medical experiences, how people interact with different kind of experiences. So it's a very, very interesting book, but we wanted to make it accessible and fun. And I think that's why his conferences too, Hannes's conferences, attract a really big audience from all around the world. We have people from India, we have people from all over Europe, from South America. And the key is that we're all human and we all experience the world. There's cultural filters that we see the world through. There's, different intellectual filters. There's all these things. But at the end, we're all human and we all have these same certain traits that control the way, we experience the world. And so it's been a wonderful journey for me, and I'm really proud of this book. It's called Magic Moments, creating transformative experiences. And the key aspect of the book that I think is really interesting, it's 2 books in one. We created this story about these 2 wizards that happen to look quite a bit like Hannes and myself, and of course I did all the illustrations, that are trying to find the secret to creating a memorable experience, a wow experience. And then on the other side of the page, so each page, when you open it up, it's like the left side of the book is the story about the wizards, and on the right side of the book are the case studies and all the programmatic and other supporting materials that we did with all these other contributors. And the 2 sides of the book kind of complement each other. So I think it's a very unique looking book. And if you choose, and the way you can use the book, I mean, if you want to ignore the storybook part of it, that's fine. And you're still going to get a rich kind of, business kind of book. And like I said, it's got a lot of theme park references, and I think anybody that works in the theme park industry should read it, but it's not just for them.
Okay, well, we'll look for that, and we're going to post the links in the comments so that
Okay.
everyone can pick those books up. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks, Joe. This is
It was
cool.
my
This is
pleasure,
really
man.
cool.
And
So,
I really admire you and what you're doing with, everything you do with the theme attraction, the student showcase, and your podcast, all this stuff. So
oh well,
you're
thanks.
out there
Well,
doing what we've been talking about today, giving back and giving back in a very generous way.
oh, thanks. Yeah, I always talk about that. You know, it was always a closed door. I remember I've got a bunch of e-ticket magazines up on my shelf,
Uh,
and you could either watch back, in the '90s before the internet, you could watch the Disneyland show if you could happen to catch it on TV. But then, I was at the break room, behind Jungle Cruise, and there was an e-ticket magazine, and it was the first time I'd ever heard the word dark ride. And it was just fascinating to me that there's people behind this. And I even this might have been your trailer, but I was behind Splash Mountain. I had an internship, and there was a sign that said Walt Disney Imagineering, and I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, those are the people who make the rides." And I said, "Well, I want to do that." And they said, "Well, you can't." Nobody can. They get 50,000 resumes a year. They throw them all the way except one. So don't even try, you know? And, but so
Well, they
I
told you
said,
that, that's not the way you do growth.
yeah, no, of course not. But the point is that to be able to sort of not have to scale a wall to be able to talk to folks and just to be able to tell the stories of the people who make the magic. That's kind of my heart and my passion, as well as just being able to give the helping hand to the kid who's trying to be the next
Yeah,
Joe Lanzisero.
no,
So
that's great.